I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Hey, have a listen to this. Obviously, I can conduct that, and I assume that you can as well. That is a bit of Mahler Symphony No. 2 in C minor. The cool kids call it the Resurrection Symphony. It is a famous 90-minute epic piece. It is wild and it's complex, and it's got a lot of moving parts, including a choral part, including like a 100-person choir that you can sort of invoke in this piece. So given that it's known to be so complex, it was, let's say, surprising that the Toronto Symphony Orchestra announced that a tech entrepreneur named Mandal Chung will be conducting this piece for the orchestra. Now, Mandal, longtime classical music fan, and he clearly sees this as more than just a hobby. But I didn't know. I didn't know that you could just rent the TSO for a night, and it turns out maybe you can. What does this mean for classical music in this country? Josh O'Kane is here to tell me about it. Josh, welcome back to the show, friend.
Glad to be back.
I'm trying to sort of impose another frame on this. This is kind of like you being like, you know what? I can just pop on stage and maybe play the lead guitar on Ashtray Rock, from front to back. But I don't think you can do that, right?
I cannot, no.
No, I didn't think that you could. Okay.
I'd love to try.
I could see that about you. Okay, walk me through this a little bit, because Mandal Chung is conducting this piece with TSO on Wednesday night. Why? Why does he want to do this?
He is a massive classical music fan. Since about 2018, Mandle Chung has been working with his own namesake orchestra, the Mandle Philharmonic, to perform across Toronto. He's performed about a dozen times, different pieces, including by Beethoven and at least a couple of Mahler symphonies. It is one thing to hire your own orchestra, freelance musicians, pay them the rate that they find fair, and perform at whatever concert hall will take you. It is another thing to basically rent one of the country's preeminent orchestras.
Yeah.
It is a massive privilege to conduct Mahler's Second, particularly with a massive nationally recognized orchestra, even if you already are a lifelong professionally trained conductor. So there are some people who have some thoughts about this.
So you don't just normally start with Mahler's Second. Like, this is not why this piece specifically? Why do you think Mandel wants to do this piece specifically?
He clearly loves it. It's beautiful. It's challenging, and it's something that you can really make your name off of if you conduct it well.
Yeah, I think maybe for people to understand the story, they need to understand what goes into conducting, because the work of a conductor is, in all circumstances, pretty challenging. In a piece like this one, is particularly challenging. So maybe you want to explain what goes into conducting a piece like this.
Yeah, so like a conductor's job is in a lot of ways to channel the composer's intentions and to imbue a piece of music with a sense of texture and cohesion beyond just keeping time, which they also do. So, you could be directing 50 musicians with a single gesture as they're navigating these extremely complex materials as they're performing this. And, with Mahler's Second, for many performances, there are more than 200 musicians if you include the choir. This is not a small number of individuals to direct. Could you imagine an air traffic controller just as a hobby kind of just saying, I'm going to go to Pearson? There are...
No, I can't. In fact, would prefer that they don't.
Professional conductors, it's basically a lifelong endurance test. You are learning an instrument, you are learning music, you sometimes have a doctorate in a lot of cases for major conductors, for musical directors. And, that's not to say that Mandal Chung has not studied up. He has been taking lessons for a very long time in order to do this. This is quite a passion of his, and he's paying everybody involved. Everything that is happening here is fully above board. What we don't know is what the performance is going to be like. He sounds like he's quite confident about it.
Well, I have a lot of passions. For example, I'm passionate about the specific drumming of Master of Puppets, and I don't think I can do that. I don't think that I can take my passion and say I can apply this to here. But Mandel's a little bit different. This whole idea is not exactly new. Take a listen to this clip from Bob's Burgers.
Can you just be a conductor?
You can if you have a love as deep as mine for Pfeffer's Fifth. Also, I've given the symphony a truckload of money, and rich people can do whatever we want.
There it is.
But isn't conducting hard?
I mean, it's kind of just waving your arms around, right?
No.
Yes.
Oh.
But it's also about a perfectly timed hair toss moment.
Look, the clip just says the thing that everyone listening to the story is thinking, right? Like that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, I'm a reporter. I'm not going to comment.
I appreciate the dedication to reportorial distance, but it's a unique story, and
It absolutely is.
And the reason I'm asking this is because it's one thing to sort of like have a career and say, you know what, I'm going to hire musicians, as you mentioned, to play in my own orchestra. The Toronto Symphony Orchestra is a fixture of this city. It's a fixture of the arts community in the city, and it feels like a whole other thing. To be able to say, you know what, I would like to play the big part in this preeminent art institution. That's the thing that I'm saying that you're not saying because you are a reporter in this case. But in your reporting, you learned that he's not actually the first wealthy businessman to do something like this in real life. You found an interesting case study from the early aughts. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so let's talk about Gilbert Kaplan. He was the founder of Institutional Investor magazine, and what he channeled his wealth into was a single piece of music, which by pure coincidence is also Mahler's Second Symphony.
I don't believe that's a coincidence.
He even owned the manuscript and tried to position himself, starting in the early 80s, as a global authority on Mahler. And he actually wound up conducting Mahler's Second over 100 times around the world. And in the early aughts, like he started doing this in the 80s. But in 2008, he came under a bit of scrutiny when he performed it with the New York Philharmonic.
Yeah.
And I'm going to quote here because one of the trombonists on his blog described the performance as A, rudderless, B, a simplistic reading, and C, a woefully sad farce.
Okay. Glad that they were really mincing words there. They're really holding it back. And they're just going to be like, let me just pull it back a little bit into the criticism. I am trying my best to sort of channel the skepticism happening around this event. And I think the skepticism comes from seeing an institution like the orchestra as being like, hey, that's you earn something like this. There's something that is sort of earned about this. But I'm not the only person who's skeptical about this. What have you heard from other sort of people around the TSO? Because and I know you can't name them, but you can maybe tell me a little bit about the reaction that you're hearing.
Yeah, so this is not anything that has been hidden. This is something that has been advertised for
it's
quite
on the
some
subway.
time.
Like the subway ads are out there for this.
Yeah, so it was just kind of sitting in plain sight. And then I was basically nudged saying, do you know what the musicians think of this? And so I started contacting musicians and people who are affiliated with their community to try to do a vibe check on what is sort of what the mindset is around all of this.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to a whole bunch of folks, and the sort of predominant feeling from people that I spoke with was that they're worried that he may not be able to pull this off. He has, there's a lot of respect for the amount of work that Mandal Chung has put into rehearsing this. There's a lot of respect for the amount of money he has put into the classical music community here in Toronto. That does not mean that musicians aren't a bit fearful. They're a bit fearful that he may not be able to handle sort of, leading an orchestra of potentially more than 200 individuals, if you include the choir, what this might mean for the reputation of the TSO, of the musicians. These are questions that people who are directly involved are asking, and they're telling me this. Now, I did speak with one musician who went on the record, who basically said, he had actually gone to with rehearsals. He said it was fine. He also has a lot of faith, as do the other folks that I spoke with, of the professional work of the musicians in the TSO.
Right.
That they will be able to pull this off. They know how to do this. They've performed this before in 2019. What people are going to be watching for is the push and pull between the conductor and the musicians, and whether there is that sense of cohesion and imbuing the performance with the real sort of beauty and intention that Mahler had for it.
I appreciate the carefulness of saying they trust the musicians. They trust the musicians fine. I don't know if the risk here is that the sound is going to be bad. I don't think that's what people are sort of watching for. But what will people be watching for in terms of being able to assess whether this goes okay or not? How do you assess that?
It's going to be really come down to the cohesion of the musicians. Each one of them will be able to perform excellently, but are they actually going to bring the emotion to the piece that Mahler intended?
Yeah. Has Mandel responded at all in any of this?
Yes. So I did an interview with Mandal Chung.
Yeah.
One of the first things he actually told me were yes, of course, these are legitimate concerns. And he's told me that he has seen performances by great orchestra performances, and he has seen some ones that he did not like. And he is hoping that he will be one of the leading ones that he's experienced himself. He tells me he's quite confident in what he's going to pull off on Wednesday night.
It makes sense to me why, if you had the means to do this, you'd want to pursue this. It makes sense to me why Mandel would want to do this. Why would the Toronto Symphony Orchestra say, please come on down on a Wednesday night and hear this happen?
So how do I put this?
How do you put this?
The Toronto Symphony Orchestra, I also spoke with the CEO, Mark Williams. He outlined the steps that came into place, including consulting with the musical director, Gustavo Gimeno.
Yeah.
And they agreed to do it. The TSO does rent its services to others. They sometimes perform film scores in conjunction with TO Live, the municipal arts organization.
Yeah.
In 2024, they backed Andrea Bocelli.
That's Andrea Bocelli, Josh O'Kane. Okay, sorry.
Well,
continue.
no, that's exactly the point. As I outlined in the story that I wrote, like each of these instances were conducted by a professionally trained conductor.
The curiosity that is recurring to me here is that the bat signal in the air that brings Josh O'Kane out is, hey, there's an arts organization that might be in trouble and they're trying to figure out some kind of way through it, which is, I suppose that's literally directly your beat. But in this particular case, does this performance kind of suggest to you anything about the state of symphonies? Because like you do spend your time looking at the state of different arts organizations. Where is Canada's classical music scene headed? Is this something that's going to be sort of more recurring in the future, you think?
It's hard to tell exactly where things are going, but I do know from the folks that I spoke with that, and in fact, Mark Williams himself, the CEO of the TSO, they told me that business considerations were a part of this. And yes, this is a transaction. This is a business deal that will bring money into the TSO. I'm not 100% sure on what that value would be. I've asked. No one will tell me for sure. But this is something that will bring money into the orchestra, and that's a consideration for any large nonprofit arts organization that will ultimately try to build a foundation for itself long into the future. What we're seeing, not just with classical music, but for arts organizations, around the country, this is an extremely tough time. If someone can come in and say, hey, can I borrow your services for X amount of time for a large sum of money, that is something that is worth considering for the sake of the financial side of this. And you can't separate that from this happening at all.
The idea of sort of considering, okay, where are all the places where we could find resources and find money, and this being an avenue, those questions are going to continue to hang around, which is exactly the kind of questions that keep you employed. Before I let you go,
all right,
what's a band where you're like, you know what, tomorrow if I had the money, I'd pay them enough and say I'm going to step in and I'm going to sing the lead parts for this entire album. What's it going to be?
I mean, there are no Ramones left, so I don't think anyone would get mad. And plus, I can't sing very well, so that's probably the best one. Sorry, Joey Ramone.
Josh O'Kane, it is always a delight and a pleasure, friend. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
Of course, you're the best. Josh O'Kane is a reporter of the Globe and Mail who covers the businesses, institutions, economics, and policy that shape arts and culture in Canada. He was with me here in our Toronto studios. Mandle Philharmonic presents Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Mahler's Symphony No. 2 is tonight